So when we talk about VO2 max or peak VO2, it is oxygen uptake. So the ability to take oxygen in and utilize it at its highest, okay? It's actually the way that we quantify and we give a number to cardiorespiratory fitness or exercise or functional capacity. So for like athletes, it's exercise capacity. If we aren't looking at professional athletes, we're talking about functional capacity. The ability to do the things that we need to do. Go upstairs, walk through the grocery store, or start maybe your running program that you've been wanting to start, but just didn't know if you could do it safely.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to another episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host and health coach, Jenn, here with you every week for wellness without the weirdness, as one podcast critic described us, right? It's like the best description ever. So each year in February, I like to do a heart health focused episode. In It Takes Heart, we made sense of the language around heart health, right? So we can know what we're talking about and understand the words that everybody's using and that our doctors are using. And then we also talked about, nutrition and lifestyle for heart health. In Matters of the Heart and Metabolism, we talked to Dr. Philip Ovadia and discussed the connection between metabolic health and heart health. Last year, we talked about how heart health is sexual health. And then we also have nutrition nuggets on heart rate, cholesterol, fats. So needless to say, we actually talk a lot about heart health around here. And yet, we have never discussed the heart and lung connection. We've all heard of the words cardiopulmonary, right? That's what we mean. It's the heart and the lungs. So we're going to focus on that today, and I have an incredible featured guest. Let me introduce you. She's an MSN, APRN, FNPC, and Chief Nursing Officer of Recovery Plus Health with years of nursing experience specializing in cardiology, pulmonary, and chronic care management. She's conducted research on improving care and bridging gaps for patients post-cardiac events, as well as patients who wish to prevent cardiovascular disease. Thank you, right? We could stop there, but we don't. She's been instrumental in developing a multi-state remote population platform to improve access to care for patients needing cardiovascular rehabilitation and in developing a program with a focus on reducing hospital readmissions. She also recently opened a clinic in New York offering cardiopulmonary exercise tests for all individuals from cardiac patients to professional athletes. That's how we met, and now she's joining us here. Without further ado, I give you Jenny Martin.
Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you so much for having me on today.
Yeah,
Very
first
excited.
of all, me too, and great name, right? We bonded
Yes.
over our name at first.
Yes.
Right.
We're linked.
I know. We are. And then in every conversation, we could talk for hours. So
Yes.
I'm excited this time for everybody to hear our conversation.
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of fun and we have a lot of knowledge. So yes, I'm so excited.
Love it. And we're going to start with your story, and then we'll deep dive into cardiopulmonary health and the CPET test and all the things. But really quick, first, we have to tell our members what they're getting this week. So members, lots of goodies. So first, I'm sending you 2 recipes this week. The first recipe is for no-bake peanut butter chocolate chip balls. Like, they're so good. Full stop. So good. And the second recipe is for coconut and almond butter energy balls. Both of them are great snacks. You can make a batch of each one, keep them in the fridge or the freezer. Everybody in the whole family is going to love these. So highly recommend. And then thanks to Jenny and Recovery Plus Health, our members are getting 50% off their initial and follow-up CPET tests, so the cardiopulmonary exercise tests, over the next 6 months. So you don't even have to be in New York City to take advantage of this. So our email on Friday will give you all of those details. So if you want either of the recipes or 50% off for the next 6 months from Recovery Plus Health on cardiopulmonary exercise tests, be sure you're a member. you're going to go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries. For just $10 a month, you get weekly recipes, a monthly article or tool, extra discounts from me and our partners, plus access to live Q&A sessions. It's a total deal. When you take advantage of the full offerings, you're saving far more than that $10 cost. It's really a steal. It's a no-brainer way to show yourself that your health is a priority. Plus, being a member supports this podcast and this community so we can continue to bring you new episodes and experts every week. So remember, you're going to go to glow.fm/salad with a side of fries, or actually just click the link in the show notes because that's a lot easier. You don't have to remember things. And then once you're there, you click support now, enter your email and payment info, click subscribe, and you're all set. You're going to get this week's recipes too. One for no-bake peanut butter chocolate chip balls, one for coconut and almond butter energy balls, and then 50% off your first and follow-up CPETs from Recovery Plus Health. Okay, Jenny, spotlight on you. No pressure.
Yes.
Let's start with your story. Like, how did you end up in nursing and then also this cardiopulmonary chronic care space?
Great question. Wow, has it been a journey? So I will start with where my true passion for cardiac health came from. So my cousin, she was 13, had cardiac arrest, then went into heart failure, needed a heart transplant at 13 years old. And we grew up in a very small town, and I'm talking rural Texas. Nearest town was 2 hours away. She did not get cardiac rehab, and unfortunately, really and truly, her quality of life was not great over that 7 years, and she did live 7 years after that. So it really kind of lit a fire for me to make a change. How do we make a difference? How do we prevent this from happening again? Can't go back and save my cousin, but it really inspired me to go and figure it out, right? And so I went to school originally for exercise science.
Wait, I have to pause you for a second.
Sure.
Were you guys the same age? My jaw's
No.
on the floor.
Yeah, no.
I'm like, oh my goodness.
Right? I know. Okay, so she was 6 years older than me. So I was a very young child. And
Yeah.
honestly, I feel like probably it was more impressionable just because I was so young and my understanding of everything was so limited at the time. But it left such an impact on me. I saw not only what it did to her as a child, but I also saw what it did to my family and her mom and her brother. And I think just really seeing that and knowing that she was not the only one that this has happened to. This was a way bigger problem than just my family, right?
For sure.
And as I got older, you just kind of hear of more and more stories of this happening. And you meet more and more people that it's like they didn't have access to care. They didn't have the ability to drive to and from cardiac rehab or to and from the doctor. And I think that this passion that I have started really and truly when I was 6 years old, and just had no idea what it was.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. You can
Yeah,
keep going,
no.
but I'm like, I am in shock. Like, that is wild.
Right. Yeah.
So anyway,
And-
you go to college.
Yeah, so I go to college and I actually went in for exercise and sports studies, so kinesiology. And I knew that I wanted to do cardiac rehab. I knew when I went into school, that's what I wanted to do. I just didn't really understand how I wanted to do that and to what extent. And honestly, even to where I am today, never in a million years would I've ever put that out there, right? You just never know. Well, I kind of hit a curve in the plan here, I guess, and became a teacher, went back to nursing school. I still knew I wanted to do cardiac rehab, but here's the trick. There's not that many cardiac rehab programs around the United States, which is another huge problem, right? Which I knew existed because my cousin couldn't go, right? I knew this was a problem. So I finally landed a job in cardiac rehab, met my boss, who is the president of Recovery Plus. And he grew up small town too, kind of a similar story, but with his grandpa. And we really, decided, like, what are we going to do? We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over and over. We know that this is a problem. How do we fix it? So we decided to take cardiac rehab virtual. So it doesn't matter where you live. We bring the cardiac rehab straight to your door. Just like in this platform that we're using now, video visits, we do cardiac rehab. So that's how I got into this. Went on to become a nurse practitioner. I still have a passion for learning more, being able to be a better advocate for my patients, continuing to grow as not only a provider, but as a community resource as well. And from there, we always know, and I feel like this is kind of a worldwide, I don't know if it's a phenomenon, but like everybody is tired of being sick and going to the doctor just for being sick. And we know that for the last 100 years or something, cardiovascular disease has continued to be the leading cause of death in the United States. And it's like, when are we going to stop and say, what can we do differently? How do we stop cardiovascular disease from being a problem? And I really feel like the answer to that is we have to do a better job at preventative care. We go in, majority of people go in, they go to their primary care, they get the standard set of blood work that tests for disease. It actually doesn't really test for prevention. It tests for disease. We get the blood work. When we turn 50 or 45, we get our mammograms, we get our colonoscopies. But what do we do for our heart?
Right,
and
we wait
lungs?
till there's a problem.
Right. And even then, we go in, we have high blood pressure, we have high cholesterol. They're like, okay, well, here's your meds, start exercising. But then what? And there's no real direction, right? It's just, start exercising. Well, if somebody is 40 years old and they haven't been exercising up to 40, then they probably don't know what to do or even how to do it safely, right? So we truly believe that CPET testing, which is cardiopulmonary exercise testing, is the gold standard for cardiovascular testing. But what we want is for everybody to get this test. No matter what your fitness level is, no matter what your background is, this is just another prevention test, just like your routine yearly blood work.
Yeah, we're going to come back to the test because I think even taking a step back from that, you're talking about cardiovascular disease, which most of us think of as, cholesterol challenges or blockages, right?
Right.
But a lot of times we identify that from a cardiovascular event. Will you just sort of define those two different things so that we're all on the same page?
Okay, so people, when they don't really know that they have a cardiac condition or dysfunction, let's use the word dysfunction, until they're in the ER with chest pain, getting ready to go back for either a stent or a bypass. They had no idea. No clue. It's the number. People will tell me all the time when they come in post-event, well, everything's been fine with my heart. I don't know what happened.
Right.
Well,
like I always say, you are not healthy the day before a heart attack. You are
Right.
not healthy the day before, God forbid, knock on wood, something happens.
Right. And you're not, but that's where you're right. It's like, I can't tell you how many patients I've seen over the last, let's say 5 years that have come and said, everything was just completely fine. And then I just had bypass times 3. And I'm like, well, first of all, no, right? But that is the flaw in our system, I guess. It's the flaw in how we function as a society, which is we don't really look at what was wrong before or leading up to that. And it's just like, well, yeah, I just had a heart attack. No big deal. I was fine before then. And you weren't. So we need to stop that event from happening.
Yeah, I think there's a conception or preconceived notion that looking at the cholesterol numbers is going to predict that. From your experience, can you speak to that connection?
Yeah, the only time that predicts that is when you come in with like an LDL of 200 or 250, right? It doesn't. And I think what people don't also take into consideration, because you have what's called obstructive and non-obstructive. So there's actually a whole category of heart attacks out there that happen because there was actually not even any obstruction at all. And it's actually called non-obstructive. And even take into consideration, like let's take it a step further. People will go in because let's say maybe their cholesterol was high and their doctor said, let's go get you a stress test, right? Stress test, the original stress test, treadmill stress testing you get done in cardiologist office, What they don't do is they don't do a ventilation perfusion ratio. They don't look at the gases. They don't look at the lung aspect of things. And so they actually don't identify non-obstructive heart disease at all. You could have a heart cath. You could go in and have a wire run up through your arteries, and they can say there's nothing obstructive here, so everything is fine. And you can have a heart attack the next day.
I mean, it's mind-boggling. And the other interesting thing, and I wonder if this is connected, because we also have this idea that athletes are the grand specimen of humans, yes. Right? That they are the epitome of health. And yet I remember so many stories, and I feel like we see it more and more in headlines now, of athletes, runners, marathon runners having cardiac arrest, right? But we picture them as they are the epitome of health. So what is it that everyone's missing here?
Yeah. So what everyone is missing is honestly the fact that so many other things can cause, and what they're experiencing is actually not a heart attack. There's a difference between myocardial infarction or heart attack, which we all know, and cardiac arrest. Two completely different things that happen in the heart. And what we associate with everything that happens with the heart is a heart attack, no matter what, right? And that's right. Just because, again, it's just a lack of people saying there's a difference. But a lot of these athletes are having cardiac arrest. And what that means is their heart just stops. There was nothing obstructing it. There probably wasn't any cholesterol going wrong. But what was happening is they're training at such an elevated level. Their heart rate is too high for where it needs to be at an extended period of time. And it was causing some sort of electrical malfunction. And I won't go into the big explanation of this, but just to keep it simple, it was an electrical malfunction that happened in the heart. I always say hearts come in electrical and plumbing. And when one of those goes wrong, that's when bad things happen. But when we look at cholesterol levels, we're only looking at the plumbing. And if the plumbing is good, then everything's great, right? But it's not. So you have these people who are training excessively. They are in what appears to be this prime health, but what they're not taking into consideration is this cardiac dysfunction that we can find using this test. They're not looking at the ischemic heart disease that's happening. And it essentially is an overuse of the heart at a very high time, right? It has more to do with the fact that they're overtraining at that really high level, which is past what we call, and we'll kind of get into this term in a little bit, but we call it the anaerobic threshold, right? Once you go past that and you have ischemic patterns, that's when those professional athletes that we see, basketball players, marathon runners, baseball players, we see them essentially have cardiac arrest, which, for lack of a better word, it's death, right? They do. And luckily we have ways to hopefully bring them back, right? Which
right, that's where Western medicine, yeah. Listen, there's a time and a place for Western medicine, and that is it.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, take the time, right, to bring up the fact that should we all be trained in CPR? Yes, because you just never know, right? But anyways, let's stay on track, right? Which is cardiac arrest, heart attack, two totally different things. We see a lot of these big time athletes that and if you think about it, how often are these people training at a very high level for more than 2, 3, 4 hours in a day? It's pretty much 7 days a week, every single day of the year, right?
Right.
They don't really take rest days, and their rest days look like, my full-blown days, And what they're doing is there's what we consider kind of safe zones with the heart rate. Some people have them, some people don't. If you have a pattern of cardiac dysfunction, then you have ischemic disease. Any point after a certain heart rate. Everybody's different though. That's the thing, is you could use all of these tools, some of the really, name brand ones, right? Which are like Apple and Garmin and Whoop. And I'm not saying they're not great. They're great. They're great tools. But what it doesn't take into consideration is every single thing that this test does, which is your ventilation perfusion ratios, your respiratory exchange ratio, your stroke volume. It doesn't take all these things into consideration to determine, is it even safe for your heart rate to get that high? It gives you your zone, but is that really your zone?
Yeah. And we're going to come back to what all those numbers mean. I guess like two other things going through my head for like foundational pieces. Our focus today is cardiopulmonary, right? And we hear those words together, right, all the time, but I don't know that like we actually recognize what that means. So how do we define cardiopulmonary fitness, or even just cardiopulmonary and then cardiopulmonary fitness?
Right. Yeah. So, and I don't know why these two terms are used so loosely. I think it's probably because you have a specialist for each, which is probably why they're so separated and never spoken about together. But, you know, the two do not work without the other. So if you have one, great. If you have the other, great. But if one of them is malfunctioning, the other one is also going to malfunction because they feed into each other. We need oxygen oxygen-rich blood to go out to the body. We need the heart to pump the blood to the lungs to get oxygenated. They're all linked together. If one doesn't work, the other doesn't work well. And it may not be an immediate effect. Oftentimes you'll see that a person will start with one, but if they live long enough with uncontrolled hypertension, for example, inevitably they're going to have something happen with their lungs. It's just some malfunction is going to start happening. We see, this is a kind of an interesting fact that most people don't link, sleep apnea.
Yes.
Right? Sleep apnea has a very high rate of coexistence and causation for heart failure. And that's very untalked about. And it has everything to do with, if we can't get oxygen, the heart just stops, right? Like it's a muscle. What happens if you don't get oxygen to the muscle?
Exactly.
Perform.
And our muscles need that oxygen, muscles fatigue, like all of those kinds of things where we don't think of the heart as a muscle often enough.
Right. And I feel like it's probably because it doesn't ever rest, you know?
Yeah.
Muscles rest, muscles hurt, muscles can get sore. Another really cool kind of fact is muscles can get big, right? So when we talk back about like the overtraining and when we look at the athletes, we sometimes don't realize that overtraining at unsafe levels can actually cause this heart muscle to thicken and to get bigger. Or we've heard the term cardiomyopathy. That's a really common term. Everybody's heard that recently.
Yeah.
Well, these are things that can cause that in seemingly healthy people from the outside.
Okay. Yeah. And again, we're going to get into one more thing because you and I are both like sticklers on the words we use.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I am always helping everybody fine-tune their vocabulary, right?
Yeah.
As in the words that we use to talk about our wellness and our health and even challenges, right? So as we talk about fine-tuning and thinking about our personal best approach to exercise, we're going to use the words optimal versus suboptimal.
Yes, absolutely.
Explain that for everybody so that they're with us.
Okay, so optimal and suboptimal. So the reason that I use these words is because I feel like when we talk about things that are suboptimal, that just means that there's room for improvement. It doesn't necessarily mean that something is bad. And I don't really like the word bad when we're talking about our health, right? We just want to improve it. It means that there's room for growth. Optimal means that things are working at a level in which it supports other systems. So, optimizing health, we want to have all the systems, heart and lungs, working with each other to support every other system in our body. Suboptimal just means it's below the level of which we can function at a safe level sometimes or at our best level sometimes. So it also means that we will always improve.
Love it. That's why we're here. That's why we tune in every week.
That's it.
Right. All right. So we're going to get into the cardiopulmonary exercise test, some of the numbers, defining some of these terms, those kinds of things, and how we can consider what our own best exercise looks like every day. Really quick, though, we got to take a break to highlight our partner for this episode. All right, friends, if you are a fan of Salad with a Side of Fries podcast and looking for how you can support us, we've got you covered with awesome merch. One of our seasonal items you might really enjoy right now, the sweatshirt. It's one of my favorites. There's also a cropped sweatshirt, but today we're talking about fitness. So let's highlight some of our fitness-related gear. So we have a muscle tee that says you can't outrun your fork. We also have ones that say hashtag Team Salad or hashtag Team Fries. There's a gym towel where, again, you could choose Team Salad or Team Fries. Before or after your workout might be the time for the quarter zip or the sweatshirt. And then, of course, there's the motivational water bottle. We also have kitchen things and, pot holders and cutting boards and all kinds of seasonal items too. So show off your love for the podcast and share if you are hashtag Team Salad or hashtag Team Fries. Just head over to our website, asaladwithasideoffries.com/merch. You can browse the full collection, snag the official Salad with a Side of Fries mug, perfect for sipping your favorite brew while enjoying our latest episode, or go for the wine bag because, balance, right? So you can take a piece of the podcast with you wherever you go. Maybe these are your best anchors to remind yourself of your commitment to yourself and your health. Simply text the word FRIES, FRIES, to 844-947-4846, and we'll send you the link right to your phone. Check out all the Salad with a Side of Fries merch. Your purchase supports all the work that we do here, shows your podcast pride, and maybe it sparks a conversation for you to pay it forward and inspire somebody else to change their health too. So again, text the word FRIES, FRIES, to 844-947-4846. This is a toll-free number. Standard text and data rates may apply. All right, Jenny, let's do a little bit. We'll make it as rapid fire as you and I are capable of in terms of understanding some of these metrics, right? And the things that you like to look at that the CPET test looks at. You already mentioned this one. So maybe we start with the respiratory exchange ratio, the RER.
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
So the reason that we look at this number is because it's the best indicator of effort. That's an actual data point. So we like to look at how is the exchange ratio affecting your work. If it's between a very, very small margin, it's 1.06 to 1.09, right? That means that the effort that the body was producing is considered good or valid or optimal, right? Let's use optimal. Oftentimes what we find is people who are professional athletes sometimes push themselves a little bit too far. And then people that maybe there's like some nervousness with it and uncertainty, they will not push themselves as far as we could go. So this number is a really good data point for us to be able to say, yes, this is an optimal test, or we can go a little bit further so that we know for sure where are your heart and lungs when it comes to exercise. So that number is extremely important and saying effort optimal, effort suboptimals, can we keep going? Or if it's suboptimal, was something stopping it? Was there a cardiorespiratory problem that was keeping it from being optimal? So that's what the R, we call it the R number, but it's actually RER, effort is what, it's all the terms that you would hear us say.
Okay, great. And then peak VO2, which I feel like the layperson is VO2 max.
Yeah. And this is a huge fitness industry term, right? VO2 max. Everybody wants to know it or they know it. Here's the trick to that is in a person who does not have symptoms.
Wait, let's even talk about what it is. Like what, let's say somebody doesn't even know, what does VO2 max even mean?
Perfect. Yeah, it is oxygen uptake. So the ability to take oxygen in and utilize it. So when we talk about VO2 max or peak VO2, it's essentially how much did you take in at its highest, okay? It's actually the way that we quantify and we give a number to cardiorespiratory fitness or exercise or functional capacity. So for like athletes, it's exercise capacity. If we aren't looking at professional athletes, we're talking about functional capacity. The ability to do the things that we need to do. Go upstairs, walk through the grocery store, or start maybe your running program that you've been wanting to start, but just didn't know if you could do it safely. So
I'm like, no, definitely no running for me, but yeah.
yeah. Or whatever, right? If it's spinning, you want to start riding your bike this spring, whatever it is. This is that number that tells us, are your heart and your lungs able to do that safely? So when we look at it from an exercise or the fitness industry standpoint, the problem with the VO2 max part of this is what that indicates is you've reached your max and there's nowhere else to go. So typically when we see this, it will plateau on our chart, which without seeing a chart, that makes it a little bit difficult. But this line, it just levels out. That means that you really have reached your max and that's your max potential and that's it. Very, 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 very rare. Normally, we see it peak. And when it peaks, that means with proper training, proper nutrition, proper hydration, proper supplementation, you can actually get that peak higher and higher and higher as we optimize your exercise or your nutrition. So peak VO2, which is what we look at, here's a really cool fact about this number too. And I don't think we talked about it before, but every time we can get that number up by 1 ml, it's per kilogram per minute, but 1 ml, right? It is 10% less of a chance for all-cause mortality. Reduces it by 10%, right? So even more reason to get that number higher. So basically, if you max, VO2 max would indicate that you're probably always just going to be at that level. And there's really nothing else, which is why it's not actually what that number is, right? We can get it better and we want to get it better because the higher that gets, the less likely you are to have all-cause mortality. Isn't that a cool number?
Love it. All right, so then peak O2 pulse.
Great number. Stroke volume. That's what that stands for. So stroke volume is, and anytime you go to the doctor, you hear them say your systolic blood pressure. That's that top number. Peak O2 pulse, stroke volume, is how much blood your left ventricle can pump out during each contraction. So it is a great indicator of cardiovascular fitness. How much blood can the rest of your body get in order to perform what you're asking it to perform? If that number is low, that left ventricle has a problem of some sort, and it is not optimally performing, which means the rest of your body, your lungs, and your muscles are also. It's like a metabolic thing, right? We hear a lot about the metabolic rate. We hear about metabolic health, metabolic syndrome, all of these things that can decrease how well your body's functioning. This number is indicative of that. So again, we want this number higher. So the cool thing about stroke volume and peak VO2 is typically they will optimize together. They'll increase together. And if they don't, that tells us that maybe there's some underlying cardiovascular dysfunction.
Yeah, and that stroke volume could be low because maybe it's stiff ventricles, maybe there's something else going, right? Like,
right.
There are elements at play there.
Yeah, this is that piece of that puzzle where earlier we kind of talked about how the exercise testing that we do, like in a cardiologist office, it doesn't really take into consideration non-obstructive heart disease. This is the piece of that could help with that, right? So it's not obstructive. There's nothing blocking anything. Maybe the muscle's just thick, or maybe it's stiff, or maybe it's too big. This piece is very important in that puzzle.
Okay, great. And then heart rate at peak, and maybe this makes sense to talk about heart rate at peak and anaerobic threshold together.
Yeah. So when we look at heart rate at peak, a lot of people think they want to function at 100%, right? And to be fair, I feel like it's kind of like, I think if you grew up doing any kind of sport, probably at all, it was keep going, keep pushing. The harder you go, the higher you get your heart rate, the better you work out.
No pain, no gain. Yeah.
No pain, no gain. And luckily, what we're finding is that's really not true. It actually, we really and truly, what we look for is that heart rate at peak to be around 80 to 85%. So it doesn't mean that you can't go over, you can, but to be at optimal performance, we want it right in that 80s percentage range. It can be a little bit too low, so we would get it up, but ultimately we want it 80, 85%. And what that tells us is that you're not really heart rate dependent. We actually don't want to be heart rate dependent. We actually want to be stroke volume dependent. That's the strong part of the heart. That's the heart getting the oxygen-rich blood out to the rest of the body. So heart rate plays a huge factor, because again, we're going to talk about zone 2, right? Which is what everybody has heard of. But we want to know what your zone 2 is. And it is partly based on where your heart rate is at peak. And that's one of those things that when we look at devices that aren't maybe customized as much, they use an algorithm that's based on your weight, your height, your sex, your age, and then the little bit of information you put in about what your current activity level is. It doesn't really take into consideration the ventilation and the perfusion ratios or the stroke volume or all these other numbers that we're talking about. So it does kind of bring us to anaerobic thresholds, right? Which is,
go for it. Yep.
It's the highest oxygen uptake. So utilizing that peak VO2 before which or at which your cardiac output starts to not be sufficient enough to support the workload that you're asking it to do. So anything before you reach anaerobic threshold, basically you could sustain for as long as you wanted to. Anything after anaerobic threshold is where we will start to see that muscle fatigue because we're building up that lactic acid. So we just don't have the cardiac output anymore, enough of it, right, to flush that out and to supply the oxygen-rich blood to those muscles in order to keep going. The higher level of cardiorespiratory fitness, a lot of times we'll call it the CRF. The higher level of cardiorespiratory fitness we have, the higher that number is, meaning you're able to go longer, you're able to go faster, but we want to make sure that we do it safely. What will happen with cardiac dysfunction is we will see people develop what's called an ischemic threshold. Anything after that number is an ischemic pattern, meaning it's like tissue death, basically is what that means. How fast does that happen? Not really that fast, but that's where we start to see those problems like cardiac arrhythmias or cardiac arrest. So
I'm not going to lie, this is like totally psychosomatic, but I'm sitting here and I feel like my chest hurts. So so full disclosure, if that's happening to you, it's happening to me.
Right. And it really can seem probably overwhelming, maybe a little scary, but knowledge is power. Knowing your numbers is control over your situation. And if the best way to find out what you can do safely is just to know. Get the data. Know your numbers. Know where you are so that you know where you want to go. If you don't know where you're starting in any journey, how do you know where you're headed? How do you know what your goals should even be? Right? So it can be a little overwhelming. It can be a little scary, especially because it's a lot of terms that maybe we know, we've heard, but we don't fully maybe understand what it looks like. So that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the last two before we get into like what somebody can expect from CPET testing.
Sure.
So inducible threshold, because I feel like that's where we're at now and sort of what happens, right? You have the anaerobic threshold, you have the inducible threshold, and pulmonary breath reserve.
Yes. So here's the really important thing with inducible threshold is not everyone has one. So this test is very sensitive, which is a good thing because we can identify very early cardiac dysfunction. So just because you have an inducible threshold does not mean, remember, we just are suboptimal. It's not bad. It doesn't mean that something is wrong necessarily, but we could get there. We could get to where we talked about earlier, which is the ER with the chest pain and the heart attack, right? We could get there, but now you know, so you're going to make differences. You're going to make changes into your lifestyle. You're going to make changes with your exercise plan. You're going to make the recommended changes to your lifestyle in order to prevent these things from happening. That's number one. But this ischemic threshold, and it's very straightforward. What this means is anything after that number, which again is different for everybody, everything after that for extended periods of time can cause cardiac damage. So now we've gone from cardiac dysfunction, which is happening prior to that, to now prolonged usage of your heart rate at that level could potentially cause cardiac damage if we don't know that this pattern is there, right?
Right.
We want to reverse that pattern. And the great news is that it is reversible because it hasn't actually become a problem yet, right?
Yeah. This for me was like, I think, and thinking about my test results, like this was the most fascinating thing because if I were to listen to, in air quotes, what everybody says you're supposed to get your heart rate to for something to be quote unquote cardio.
Right.
Right? Like that is beyond my threshold. And that is probably why, like, I don't enjoy those activities.
Right. And you find that you don't perform well at them. It's not just that I don't like it. It's that something just doesn't feel great about it. It's like hard, but also it almost feels, if you're really in tune with your body, which the more you do, the more you become in tune with it, you just feel that something isn't right with it. It doesn't feel, you can't do it for very long and you feel very winded and it's outside of the normal okay, I just push myself. It's not that. It just feels different. But you're right. It's so different.
If you're a longtime listener, anytime we have talked about running, I joke that like I don't run for anything. And I just don't think we should do things that make us feel like we're going to die. And running makes me feel like I'm going to die. And like, that's a very broad stroke, absurd way of saying exactly what you're saying, which is like, it doesn't feel right to me. There's definitely something. And now I know why.
Right. You have your answers. Yeah. The cool thing about it is if you really got it in your head that you want to run, let's say you just set this goal this year and you say, I'm going to run. You now have the information to train in a way that you won't feel like you're going to die when you're running.
Right.
We can monitor your heart rate. We can keep it in your ranges, and you can start to not only increase distance, but speed over time to where if you did actually want to run, let's say you wanted to run a 5K, that was your goal, we can help you work to that because now we know what ranges you need to stay in order to do that safely and optimally.
Yeah. Love it. All right. So let's talk about the CPET test. From my experience, like it was really entertaining, right? I think you guys made it very comfortable. And I'll just describe it and then you can tell people what's actually happening, right? So sitting in a chair, right? We did a couple like baseline things of breathing, trying to get a function of like my heart rate, right? With blood pressure and pulse and all that stuff. And then breathing to see what my, lung capacity is, right? Just sitting there. Yeah. And then hooked up to like an EKG and all the things, like you guys are going to see the pictures on Instagram, like hook up to all the things, you get on a stationary bike and you guys just had me pedal, right? Talk about what you guys are doing while I was sitting there pedaling.
Okay. So that first test when you're in the chair and it's a turbine that you're blowing into. And what this is looking at is how much air can your lungs take in? So think oxygen uptake. How much air can they blow out? Think CO2 output. Okay, so that's what we're measuring behind the scenes. We want to know your forced vital capacity. How much air can you take in? How much air can you get out? What that helps us get to is your breathing reserve and your ventilation perfusion ratios. When we look at the pulmonary testing at exercise, if we don't know what that is at rest, it's really hard to get those numbers when you're at exertion. So that's the first step. Then we put all of the Darth Vader looking masks on and the EKG patches. We have you sitting on the bike, and what it's doing is actually getting your current baseline effort just to sit and function doing nothing, right? So we want to know how much does your body, your heart and your lungs have to work to just be doing nothing. You just sit there for 3 minutes and you do nothing. That's what we're looking at. We want to know, do you have any underlying abnormal arrhythmias or rhythms that are off with your heart? So normal sinus rhythm, that's normal. Do you have anything underlying there? That's what we're looking at. So we're looking at this big screen over here that we actually kind of turn so that people don't get nervous. But all that is your EKG. So we're monitoring that. We're also checking your blood pressure. Pre-exercise, when you're just sitting, we also check it. Now what you're going to start doing is doing your 3 minutes of cycling with no resistance at all. And so what that's looking at is with minimal exertion, what does it take for your body to function, heart and lungs, at that rate? Now we start to kick in the resistance, and that's where it gets fun, right? That's where I always say you start out really nice and slow, like you're going through the park, and then all of a sudden you hit some wet concrete. And it's pretty quick. So our goal is not to have you on that bike for more than really 7 to 15 minutes, because we don't want to know how long you can go. We just want to know how fast you can get to peak and what that looks like from a cardiorespiratory function factor. So we start to amp up that resistance pretty quickly. We're checking your blood pressures. We're looking, does your blood pressure go up too fast? Does it go up too high? How's your heart rate? How is your rhythm? All of these things behind the scenes are being measured, all while you're still breathing in and out of what we call the Darth Vader mask. And you're breathing out your oxygen, out your CO2, you're breathing in the oxygen, and we want to see what that ratio is. So that's what's kind of going on behind the scenes. But all the while, we are listening to music and we're having a good time, and you're just getting a workout in. It's like a 15-minute session of fun and sweat.
Yeah. And then all those test results go to a cardiologist. And then if you choose to do this with Recovery Plus Health, you sit down with Jenny for an hour or so and go through those results. And then Jenny gives you like an exercise prescription.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, somebody could go somewhere else, right? Like there are a lot of these things that people can get some of this information and figure it out. But ideally, what we're learning is target heart rate and time in different heart rate zones to improve a lot of the numbers and things that you told us, right? Because it's about us compared to us and getting to a optimal place.
Correct. Yes. And even like certain companies out there that you can go and work out with, and they do classes and they have you track your heart rate. They have heart rate zones. That's something that we've been using for a very long time. What it is we're trying to figure out what yours are, because I have seen people's zone 2 heart rate be 130 to 150. And I've seen it same age, same gender, same everything be 100 to 120. I've seen it in the 80s to 95s. And what it boils down to is cardiac dysfunction. Is it optimal? Is it suboptimal? Are there things underlying that maybe we just need to start working on? So everybody is so different. But if you and I went in, our heart rate zones on any app, on any fitness center, if we did it on the computer, right? They're going to be very similar. But are they?
Right.
They're not, right?
Right. I learned that mine is definitely not what I would have thought.
Right. Like I know both of our heart rate zones, right? I know my zone 2, you know your zone 2, and they're not the same. But if we were to use the calculations that are just kind of out there for everybody to try to use, they would be very close, because it's not taking into consideration anything else. Our health history, our cardiac function, our pulmonary function, what our body needs too, right? What do our bodies need to be able to perform at the workload that we're asking them to? That's going to differ per person as well. So,
yeah. And then, so once somebody figures out their zone 1, 2, 3,
yes.
Is the recommendation always the same of this much time in zone 2 and this much time doing sort of intervals between 2 and 3? Or like how does somebody then translate this information into their best training effort?
Right. So a lot of things that I do take into consideration is if they're already active, what are they doing? Because typically what people are doing, if they are already active, is what they like to do. So I just like to utilize what they're already doing and implement our heart rate zones. So they don't all look the same. For example, if it's somebody that hasn't been exercising, or they haven't exercised in a long time, or they've maybe had something happen, right? They had COVID, or they had whatever, something happened. We will actually start different. Well, so no, the answer is no, it's not all the same, because I may start somebody with, if they can't do 20 minutes of continuous aerobic exercise in their zone 2 heart rate, they don't get to advance to HIIT training yet. Because HIIT training is going to ask them to get their heart rate up a little bit. We call it the 2-to-1 ratio. So it's 2 minutes zone 2, 1 minute zone 3. And they're not ready for that because they can't sustain at least 20 minutes of the continuous aerobic exercise at zone 2. Until they can do that, we don't progress to the next level, which would be HIIT training. So no, every prescription is going to look a little bit different. If it is somebody that's really already been exercising and training, we try to incorporate that into what they've already been doing, especially when we have our professional athletes come in We're not going to change what they're doing. It's a marathon runner. We're not going to say, okay, stop running and start doing this instead. That doesn't even sound reasonable. So what we do is we customize, and oftentimes we work with a running coach as well, because they're the ones, right, that are actually giving them their training routine for the week. And then we are working with them to say, okay, these are their heart rate zones. What can we do to keep them in this? So it's very individualized.
Yeah. And just like anything, I want to, wrap this up by saying, right, and you started to mention this before, just like anything, we don't want to look at any one test in isolation, right? Absolutely. It's about looking at the CPET results or, your cardiopulmonary function in connection with other lab work, your nutrition and your sleep and all of the other things.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that we actually, if you choose to go with us and we sit down and we review your test for an hour, which we do an hour because I want to make sure any questions that are had get answered. But we go over that. But the next whole piece of that is lifestyle. What do you do currently? What can we change? What can we optimize? What supplements do you take? What supplements should you take? How's your sleep? How's your stress, right? We all know that stress can kind of actually cause high oxidative levels in the body. And so what are we doing on the back end to not only optimize your health? Yes, this test, great, let's get your results more optimized, but what about everything else that's underlying? That cannot be ignored. Blood work. I often will recommend blood work. That's just, we're looking for prevention. We're not looking for disease, right? We want to know what can we do to optimize these things.
Awesome. All right. It's time for a rapid fire, but anything we missed, anything you want to say to sort of wrap it up?
I don't think so. I think we covered that all. I think everything's been covered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got it. Awesome. Highly recommend looking at this as a way of fine-tuning and personalizing that activity. So we have sort of, right, like what we enjoy doing and then coupling that in with looking at the full function of the heart, the lungs, the muscles, and how all of that works together.
Yes. All three pieces. Awesome. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. It is time for a rapid-fire off-topic questions. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
No pressure. Okay. What's the best thing you've done for your health this week? What's the naughtiest thing you've done related to your health this week?
Okay. The best thing I've done for my health this week is I did my Zone 2 training today. Actually, I've done it every day this week.
Nice.
Yeah. The naughtiest thing is, is it naughty? Moderation, right? But I did have some cheesecake.
Yeah, exactly. Sounds delicious. Right? That's why I use the word naughty, because it's like kind of funny too. Right?
You know what my favorite thing to do with a piece of cheesecake is I like to have multiple little bites of it over like 4 days, because then you're still just having the one piece, but
yes.
I'm
a big fan of a couple bites.
Right.
Awesome. All right. If you weren't a nurse, what would you do?
Oh, I would be a vet.
I could see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's still kind of healthcare, right? But with animals.
Yeah. Favorite book on any topic other than your area of expertise? Or you could give us a fiction book.
Okay. The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo.
Good one.
It's a great read. Yeah. Funny fact, it's the first book I've read since I got out of school like 5 years ago. Right. I've been scarred.
Totally. So, full disclosure, every time I say I read something, I listen to it. If you could cure one ailment, disease, or sickness, what would it be?
Alzheimer's.
If you were a superhero, what would be your superpower?
Probably
teleportation.
Thank you. Teleportation.
I know it because that's mine too.
Yeah, teleportation, 100%.
What's your biggest pet peeve?
Being late.
Mm-hmm. All right, last one.
Okay.
Maybe we know the answer to this. In your opinion, what's the next frontier in wellness?
Well, what should it be or what will it be? No.
Both.
Okay. I think if I could say more access to preventative care. And it's not just about being able to access it, right? But it's also affordability, right? Being able to not only access it, but afford it to all care, preventative care. That's got to be the next thing.
Love it. Well, Jenny, thank you for being here. Just truly appreciate you and all the time that we have spent and sharing all your insights with everybody. Tell everyone how to connect with you, where to learn more, all the stuff.
Yes. So you can find us on Instagram at recoveryplus.health. You can call us at 800-242-6221. You can find us on the internet. You can go to recoveryplus.health, and you can email us as well at info@recoveryplus.health.
Right. We'll put links to everything and all the info in the episode notes too for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. So get in touch with us. We'll get you scheduled. We get you a kind of an intake form, and it's very easy from that.
Awesome. Well, Thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So, all right, friends, it is Nutrition Nugget o'clock. On Friday, we are talking about Barbell's protein bars. So shout out to RJ. RJ reached out with this one, asking us to look at it together because this was the first time he had seen sugar alcohols listed on a package. So we're going to check out the label together on Friday in this week's Nutrition Nugget. So be sure wherever you're listening now, click the plus sign or the follow button, and then your app will alert you at 3 a.m. on Friday when the Nutrition Nugget goes live. So by the way, I guess that brings us to our wrap up. I am Jenn Trepeck, your host. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I am at Jenn Trepeck, JENNTREPECK. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message, your ideas, your requests for nutrition nuggets, your takeaways, anything you want to share, we want to hear. It's also the easiest way to learn more about working with me as your health coach. Jenny Martin, thank you again for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. It's been a ton of fun, as always.
Seriously, I know. Always. Love seeing you. All right, friends, if you are not already, join our membership program by going to glow.fm/saladwithasideofries to show your support for this podcast and this community, but most importantly, truly support your health. You'll get this week's recipes for the no-bake peanut butter chocolate chip balls, the coconut and almond butter energy balls, and 50% off your first and follow-up CPET test from Recovery Plus Health. So until next week, remember, it's not just cardio. It's cardiopulmonary. So consider this your invitation to move smarter rather than harder by looking at your personal exercise prescription. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.